spirit of optimism and innovation to the solution of current problems. The Roosevelts have been part of my life since I was a child. I remember seeing my mother cry when my father died. I was 8 years old. She was all of 39. And remember, it was a lot tougher for a woman in the 40s for a single head of household who was trying to figure out how she was going to raise 2 children on her own than it is today. And it's pretty bad today. We lived in Newburgh in Orange County near the Stewart Airfield, which was then a military base. The following April, less than a year later, I remember my mother crying once again as she looked up to the sky and saw a plane overhead flying towards Stewart. When I asked why she was crying, she said that the plane was carrying President Roosevelt home for burial. He had died, like my father, very suddenly, a few days earlier, of a cerebral hemorrhage. I have more than once tried to figure out my mother's emotions over the loss of these 2 anchors of her life: the husband who took care of her home, the president who took care of her country, both of whom were essential to the well-being and future of her children. How people felt about their president, particularly that president, was very different from how we respect and treat our presidents now. How unfortunate for young people today. And to be quite frank, none of us seemed to have the personal connection with anyone in government that was evidenced in my mother's tears that April day in 1945. For me, that was until September of 1969. I was newly married, newly admitted to the New York State Bar, dabbling a little bit in politics. That year I ran for state committee woman and as a delegate to the Judicial Conference under the name of Geraldine Ferraro. And I saw an announcement that Eleanor Roosevelt was going to appear at a local community house to give a talk. It was the first, and obviously not the last time, I dragged my then apolitical husband to an event. I can remember being swept away by Mrs. Roosevelt. Her comments, her voice, her stature. I told more than one person that when I went up to her afterwards and made a comment about her talk, she was most gracious, and that I was struck by her imposing presence, that she was bigger than life. Of course, one of my more unkind friends pointed out that she actually was much bigger than my life. She was 5'11" and a half in her stocking feet, and I am, when stretched to my tallest, 5'4". But that did not change my view of her imposing presence. I, of course, after that meeting, wanted to find out more about this woman who became such a hero to me and who died 2 short years later. What was obvious was that even if she hadn't been married to the great FDR, she would still have been one of the greatest women leaders of the 20th century. I have been asked more than once who my role models in life were. I've always said 2 women, my mother and Eleanor Roosevelt. In many ways, they were very different. Physically, my mother was even shorter than I. But emotionally, in every other way, like Eleanor Roosevelt, she was 10 feet tall. My mom came from a poor immigrant family. She had a limited formal education and was a single head of household struggling to educate her kids. I think that what we have to do is point out to other women who are precisely in my mother's same position today that it is a can-do position. Eleanor Roosevelt came from a well-known and wealthy family and was married to one of the most powerful men in the world. So how were they alike? My mother put her hopes and dreams in me and my brother. She fought to make sure that I had the same opportunities as any other child, male or female. She told me that I could be whatever I wanted to be, and I believed her. I am who I am because of her. Eleanor Roosevelt, who could have just stayed home and done the traditional first lady at the time job, became a voice for women throughout the world. Not only as a young woman supporting suffrage, but also as First Lady during World War II, visiting troops, and her work continued long after the president died. I read Steve Neal's book a while back, which chronicles her exchange of letters with President Truman. She was a gutsy lady. She fought with him every inch of the way. Truman appointed her a delegate to the United Nations General Assembly, specializing in humanitarian, social, and cultural issues. In 1948, she drafted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Affirming life, liberty, and equality internationally for all people, regardless of race, creed, or color. And that led to the creation of the United Nations Commission on Human Rights. As someone who served on the Commission as ambassador for 3 years, let me tell you that it was not the Commission as Eleanor Roosevelt envisioned it. But that being said, it was the only game in town to put human rights abuses into the international spotlight and occasionally by doing so affect change. The fact that the Bush administration opted the United States out of membership during their period of time and any discussion of influence on this important issue by refusing to seek membership in the Commission was absolutely mind-boggling to me, and I am so glad that President Obama has now brought us back to the table to have input into human rights abuses around the world. I have spent an adult lifetime admiring Eleanor Roosevelt as a political person, though I believe that she would have truly hated that designation, who understood how to use her clout, whatever it was, at whichever point in her life, to work for the benefit of others. She knew how to push, and she did things that were definitely unpopular. Above all, she was a person of principle. Whenever she sought a position, it was not about her. It was about someone or something else. So often today, young people don't see this in our political leaders. Perhaps things are a bit more complex now than it was in the 40s and 50s, not issue-wise, and certainly not in scope. Remember, FDR moved us out of a depression, created the Social Security system, the New Deal, and Eleanor, believe it or not, back then was fighting for universal health care. I can only imagine the conversation between the two of them when she pressed on health care. Enough, Eleanor, I've got a war to end. FDR obviously had to deal with priorities too, but the world is smaller and more diverse today, and we are a different country from the one that FDR led out of World War II, and that Eleanor Roosevelt and Harry Truman, and yes, even Dwight Eisenhower led into the beginning of the Kennedy era. Eleanor Roosevelt's accomplishments are many, but what made them so significant is that they were achieved despite the fact that in many instances she was taking unpopular stands. She withstood attacks because of her courage and integrity. She succeeded because of her dedication to principle. Now, when I was called this summer about this award, I was really pleased for all the reasons I have just laid out. But equally as important to me was the fact that this award comes from the Eleanor Roosevelt Legacy Committee. It is more than appropriate that an organization like yours is named for her and takes her example to promote women for political office. As I mentioned, she was dedicated to principle. You are dedicated to principle. The women you are supporting sometimes take unpopular stands, but they do so because they have courage and integrity. And that is important. So I thank you for your leadership on this issue. I have spent the past 35 years talking about the importance of having women in public office. Of course, I am disappointed when I see two highly competent women, such as those who ran in New York City's latest election, lose an election. And women who are supposedly anxious to elect women justify their support for the male in the race not only by talking about the good things they see in their candidate, which is perfectly fine, but what bothers me is when they feel compelled to say something negative, really negative, about the woman who is also running. I become not only disappointed, but really a little bit crazed. I'm also curious as to why the most feminist of women have difficulty supporting political women. I'm sure some of your candidates have seen this in their races as well. And for those who think that I would support any woman just because she is a woman running for office, that's not so. In fact, I guess that's what John McCain thought when he called me just after he announced Sarah Palin as his running mate. When I told him how pleased I was that he had appointed a woman, he said, "Would you like to talk to her?" And of course I said yes, and he gave me the phone to talk with her. Very strange conversation. No, let me make absolutely sure that you know that it has to be a Democrat first. And then she has to be as good as the guys she is running against and preferably better, like Hillary. If I don't find those basic things, I stay out of the race. And I certainly don't say anything negative about the woman candidate. I am convinced that win or lose a race, every time a woman runs, women win. I look at the fact that little girls who are watching her run are saying to themselves, "Oh, I couldn't do that." But electing women to office, as you already know, goes beyond a role model to approaching the job differently, and as Justice Sotomayor said, bringing her experience to the debate. Many of you have read Harvard professor Carol Gilligan's book, In a Different Voice. It was written quite a while back, but it still holds true. She argues that women's voices are essential to good government. Now, that's not necessarily because we are more caring or more effective, though that should be true, but because we bring another dimension to the political process. She is generalizing, I agree, but she says that instead of engaging in confrontation, women are more apt to negotiate. Instead of looking for short-term solutions to problems, women are more apt to think in terms of generations to come. Instead of thinking in win-lose terms, women are more apt to see the gray area in between. And we're seeing an example of that on the Republican side in the Senate with Olympia So attempting to make some sort of a compromise agreement on the health care bill. Now, there are some who would disagree with that analysis. Several years ago, I had the honor of introducing Sandra Day O'Connor, who was giving a speech on women in the law. Since I'm a lawyer, I referenced some of her opinions in my introduction, as well as those of Justice Ginsburg, and I made a point of saying that there being women did make a difference. Justice O'Connor would have none of that. Though she agreed we all bring our experiences to the jobs we do, she didn't see gender as a distinguishing factor in her decisions. Since I was not practicing before the Supreme Court, I said, well, Justice O'Connor, you're wrong. To be quite frank, if it doesn't really, in some way make a difference that she is a woman on the court, why are we pushing, then, to have a woman on the Supreme Court? It is great to see that Justice Ginsburg and Justice Sotomayor don't seem to have Justice O'Connor's problem. And the women who this committee supports for office don't seem to have a problem with their using their experience as women to make a difference. The governor was absolutely phenomenal in giving you all of the statistics on what we have accomplished so far, but he went even further than talking about political women. He went into where women are in the workforce. And I think that the impact that you as political women have on women in the workforce was certainly brought out with his statistics as well. Take a look at the legislation, if you can, at any point. For the legislation, you're all on different levels, which I think is just great, to see the legislation that affects women in particular. And I would bet that if you go down the list, that at least 90% of it is put in by women who are looking at an issue in a way that has never been looked at before. Women legislators do make a difference. And not only is it women legislators, it is throughout the entire system. Every woman, one of the women who are here today, as well as those who are running and who are not here today and who are in public office, every one of you are important, not only because of the work you do, but because of your being in office. You show little girls that women are willing to take risks. I remember going throughout the state in 1990 trying to help 15 women who were running for the state Senate against heavily financed incumbent Republicans. We lost every race, but that's okay. You learn by losing too. And the risk is worth taking because when women do win, they are where they belong, helping to make decisions that are important not only to their family and community, but to the state and ultimately to their country. So, I am doubly impressed and grateful for this Lifetime Achievement Award. First, because it comes from a group that does, in my view, the Lord's work of electing women to office. And secondly, because it is in the name of Eleanor Roosevelt. Many thanks, Mrs. Roosevelt, for being an inspiration, and thank you all. You know what? That's the sensitivity.